My name is Sherri Graves Smith, and I was an attorney with the Coca-Cola Company until I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer in November of 2007. My life changed dramatically just with the onset of that diagnosis. Cancer doesn't run in my family. I had always exercised, had eaten pretty well, and I was pretty much so blindsided by the diagnosis. Immediately, I had to get a port installed. I also wanted to have children, so I had surgery also in order to keep options open for children in the future. But the next thing I knew, I was undergoing radiation therapy and chemotherapy 5 days a week for 30 days. And it was just a blur for me in just going to work every day, negotiating contracts with clients, getting ready for the holiday season, and all of these plans that I had, to being totally immersed into fighting for my life. I had everything to change from when I had become a totally independent person to now having to rely on someone to drive me somewhere, to fix my meals for me, to sometimes even having to feed me and dress me at times. After I had the 30 days of radiation and chemotherapy, I moved back in with my parents for a while in order to recuperate for my surgery. After a few weeks of having recuperated at my parents' home, I actually continued to get really sick, and it turned out that my colon had become inflamed from so much radiation, and I found myself in the hospital being diagnosed with being in chronic pain and an inflamed colon. So once again, hospital stay, staying with my parents, and preparing for surgery. I went into Northside Hospital for surgery in March of 2008 to have the tumor removed. I thought that I would have a week's stay in the hospital, but it turned into 3 weeks. I lost my ability to eat. My digestive system fell asleep. I had an ostomy bag, a J-peg, from a stent that had been inserted in my urinary tract. Things got so bad that I had to go on TPN because I had no way of being able to eat. It wasn't a matter of not having an appetite. I could not digest food. I couldn't chew. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't keep anything down. And after 3 weeks of being in the hospital, I found myself totally dependent on TPN nutrition and weighing hardly 100 pounds. I was dismissed from the hospital, and I went back to my home where my mother, my boyfriend, who eventually became my husband, and lots of family and friends came in and out of the house. I had to borrow my grandmother's walker. I could not negotiate the stairs, so my household was changed where I could stay on one level. My mother would sleep on the sofa to make sure she could hear me if I needed her in the night, and my dad held the fort down with taking care of our family pet. I thought that the worst was over after I regained my ability to eat after 7 weeks of being on TPN. But after that, I had 6 more months of chemotherapy. So part of doing that, I would go to chemotherapy every other Monday. I would infuse there and then wear a pack home and infuse for another 36 hours. Then I would have a week's rest. During that time, I was able to return to work on a part-time basis and try to get some normalcy in my life. I was also engaged during that time, and it detracted from the throes of undergoing cancer treatments so I could focus on planning my wedding. So in the midst of undergoing chemo, where I would wear the pack for 36 hours, working at Coke, and planning a wedding, I really thought that I was on the tail end of my cancer journey and starting to look forward to having my career and getting married and starting a family. So my husband and I got married on the 1 year anniversary of my surviving my first year of cancer and what I thought would be my last year of cancer. We ended up having my final treatment with the PAC on New Year's Eve, and by January 2nd I was able to get up out of bed, detach myself from that PAC, and I was actually at work that Monday morning ready to get started in a new year cancer-free. Not too long after that, my husband and I wanted to take our honeymoon. We took some time so I could have my energy in order to really enjoy some time on the beach. And we came back from there wanting to look into having a family. I had to undergo some additional tests, PET scans and things like that, to make sure that it was okay for me to go off of chemotherapy. Spots were found, and it turned out that the original tumor had metastasized to both of my lungs. 1 week after getting that diagnosis, my husband, who is a science teacher, was laid off from work. And then I found myself in the position where he was going to have to look for another job from being laid off. And I was going to start chemotherapy again, which entailed infusing on Mondays and wearing the PAC for 36 hours. That's when life became extremely rough. After going through 1 year of this, my reactions to the chemo became extremely difficult to manage. I had extreme nausea, extreme pain, and my hair started coming out. I was losing a lot of weight. But what I found throughout the process was that I always had access to pain medication, nausea medication. I had someone to drive me to the emergency room, drive me to my doctor's appointments. I didn't think twice about a co-payment. If I needed to go out and get medication of a certain type, if I needed to refrigerate certain medications, I did not think about the fact that I actually was able to pay my electricity bill. I didn't think about the fact that I didn't have creditors knocking down my door to ask me for payment on my mortgage. It took everything in me to just keep going and focusing on getting better. But after a while, I just could not handle working and going through chemotherapy, so I had to leave my job again. It was devastating in many ways because I had worked so hard for my career, and being so young, I had so many dreams of what I wanted to accomplish as an attorney for Coke. But then I had all of these dreams that I wanted to fulfill as a newlywed. And on top of that, I was fighting for my life. What I'm really thankful for is that out of all of the stresses that come from having the disease itself, whether it's feeling horrible, or whether it's deferring your dreams, or whether it's having these close relationships with friends that don't show up for chemo that next week because they've passed away, it can really make a person live on the edge when one is having to face financial issues as well. In the midst of really trying to find peace and continue to forge ahead, the way I made it through was to count every single blessing. I am thankful that Coca-Cola treated me and continues to treat me as a part of their family. Many of them provided rides, books. They brought me pajamas, sent meals, cooked meals. I had family and friends who went out of their way to do everything from folding my laundry and Christmas shopping for me to actually having to dress me, get me ready to go to chemotherapy. Even though this is very difficult and I suffer, I don't suffer the way others do in that I have a support system. And I wanted to do something that would demonstrate my thankfulness, but at the same time, it would help others have a chance where I've been so blessed to have a chance. And so I actually thought about starting my own foundation. And as I researched and looking into what I wanted as a part of my foundation, I wanted to fill the gaps that go unnoticed. I wanted for people to have access to nausea and pain medication without having to worry about what they pay for it. I wanted for people to be able to have a ride to chemo, or to be able to enjoy the pleasure of having a warm bath and clean clothes on, to live in dignity, to live without the stress of a creditor calling, or a phone being cut off, or electricity being cut off, or having to facilitate a foreclosure and move in the midst of fighting for one's life. What I found is that Atlanta Cancer Care Foundation addressed that. What I liked so much about it is that the money goes to the end user. The money can actually be used to help someone in a very vulnerable and stressful time, to take one burden off in order for that person and that person's family or friends or caretakers to focus on what is important, and that is fighting cancer and living life to its utmost potential, to living life in dignity. And that's what I found about Atlanta Cancer Care Foundation, and it really struck a chord in me. So I approached my manager, Angus Haig, and I asked him if we could have a fundraiser. And he asked me, of course. And so he said, how much money would you like to raise? I was like, oh, it would be great if we raised $5,000. And I thought, that's a lot of money. And still to this day, I think of that as a lot of money, and that it can actually make a huge difference. Well, the first benefit surpassed my wildest expectations in that we were able to raise and donate $155,000 to the Atlanta Cancer Care Foundation. I cannot even express the depth of gratitude that I had. I had one friend who would come to chemo and have to pack up boxes where the medicine had been shipped to chemotherapy because his house was under foreclosure. I never wanted to see someone that experienced that again. And since the fundraiser that we had in 2011, I've seen what I would call small miracles occur at Atlanta Cancer Care. I've seen people come in distressed, in tears, and then suddenly they change as if a cloud has been lifted, and that same person will come by and say, our prayers have just been answered. We're going to be able to get medication. We can keep fighting. What I've seen is that the foundation has done more than just allow a person to have access to medication. It gives that person the ability to have a good night's sleep. It gives that person the ability to not have to think about, am I going to have to choose between a shelter or food? This medication that needs to be refrigerated, I don't have to worry about keeping the utilities on just so I can have access to it. There's a certain peace of mind that comes along that gives just enough that allows us to have that fortitude to continue in the fight. In October of 2011, I was diagnosed as having a chronic condition. And that means that we do everything possible to keep the cancer at bay. And I have a chemo regimen where I infuse every Monday, and I take chemo pills Tuesday through Friday. And I've been doing that year after year. I continue to do that now. It is very hard because I want to do things that are normal, like work, like raise a family, like to be able to go to concerts and out to dinner and not worry about picking up a cold that could turn into something more serious. But in the grand scheme of things, I have a very beautiful life because there's never been a time in this journey that I have had to say, how am I going to get to chemotherapy? Is that nausea medication accessible to me? Am I going to have to live in pain? Am I going to lose my home? I am thankful. And what I am really thankful to the Atlanta Cancer Care Foundation for is that it brings peace of mind and quality of life in just the simple things that mean so much to us as human beings. And I am excited about this year's event. I know that a lot of good is going to come out of it. And I know that people who are participating have all different levels of an economic background and what they can do. But whether it's $1 or $100 or $1,000, it all goes towards an extremely wonderful cause, and all of it is put to good use. It gives us courage. It gives us hope. It gives us strength. It gives us the ability to live victoriously, and I am so grateful for that.